So would love to introduce every single, all of you. I guess Andrew, starting with you, and then we'll go clockwise around here. Oh, Andrew, can't hear you. You're muted.
Hello, my name is Andrew Ridgey. I am the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. We're an association that represents restaurants, bars, and nightclubs in New York City. So we do a lot of advocacy work, education, training, and obviously the past 7 months have just been around the clock trying to save the future of our industry here in the city, which has just been so hard hit. And happy to be here and be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Sean?
Hi, guys. I'm Sean Maloney out here in Los Angeles. I work for Nancy Silverton. I manage her Osteria Mozza restaurant, which we've now kind of pivoted to blend with the Pizzeria Mozza and our outdoor dining currently. So, yeah.
Awesome. Christelle?
Hi, everyone. My name is Christelle. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coady, which is the first company to provide daytime workspaces in private homes, allowing people to walk to work in the neighborhoods. I'm also a city planner by training, and I'm based in San Francisco.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think this is going to be a really awesome panel, and can't wait to get your perspective on the future of cities. But before we get into all that, let's start with kind of the beginning of the crisis, when everyone had to scramble to get outdoor dining set up. I guess, Andrew, can you talk a little bit about what the city New York did to kind of get that up and running, and how difficult that was?
Sure. Yeah. So, we knew when the pandemic hit and restaurants started getting shut down that we were going to be shut down indoors for who knows how long. I mean, we just got to 25% occupancy on September 30th, and we knew that at any point it was going to be a reduced occupancy. So if we had less space indoors, we could make that space up outdoors. The problem was that in New York City, there was a sidewalk cafe program available, but it was expensive. It was time consuming to go through the whole application process and actually get a sidewalk. There were a lot of areas where they were restricted. So we basically came out with a hardcore campaign basically saying, we need to reimagine how we use public space in a way that's going to help save as many restaurants as possible. So we need to cut through the red tape, kick down the bureaucracy, and stand up an outdoor dining program that's inclusive, that restaurants can participate in quickly, that doesn't cost money because people don't have money. So in effect, through executive orders, there was essentially like a zoning overlay that said any restaurant could use the sidewalk space in front of their business as well as the curb space, the roadway, or the parking spots. Subject to certain limitations if there's like bus stops or no standing zones or fire hydrants. And the business could self-certify. So all they needed to do was go on, basically submit some basic information. They didn't need architectural renderings. They didn't need an architect to certify anything. They could easily then submit it to the city that they are meeting all the requirements and, get going. And it's been critically important. Pre-pandemic, there were more than 25,000 eating and drinking establishments in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And there's about 10,500 restaurants that have signed up to participate in outdoor dining. So
wow,
an enormous number. But obviously it's still only about like 40% or so of the total restaurants, which says it's important, but it's not going to save the industry. And clearly as it starts getting cooler in New York and then it starts getting cold, although we've now allowed different types of heat lamps to be used, in a snowstorm or, when the weather's in the teens, it's not going to be a reality for most people to eat outdoors. So indoor occupancy increasing is going to be so important. That was like the long short of it. But I will say it really not only helped restaurants, it helped bring people back to work. I think it brought maybe back 100,000 people or so back to work in the industry. Wow. It's brought like an energy and a vitality back to the city streets, which was so important because restaurants are the backbone of our city, the cultural fabric, and the streets were desolate. They were getting dirty. They were dark. So it's brought this energy that I think has helped the city overall in our recovery process and in our spirit, all while obviously helping restaurants and helping jobs.
Totally. Awesome. Sean, do you want to add the LA perspective and what you kind of saw at the beginning of March?
Yeah, I mean, when everything first shut down, we were kind of at a scramble where no one really knew what to do, and everyone's kind of calling other restaurants saying, "Hey, what are you guys thinking about doing? What are you guys doing?" And then Mayor Garcetti eventually came out with the Alfresco program. So basically, you were allowed to set up and eat tables and extend your food and beverage permits to the sidewalks around. So we converted our back parking lot essentially into a piazza or terrace, as we're calling it. And we reused all the boards that were covering the windows during the George Floyd protests from people breaking the windows. So we reused all that wood and built sort of this whole area. So we kind of really get about 35 seats out there and then about 60 seats elsewhere on the streets as well. So between that, we have about 90 seats all day. So still a lot less than the 300 we normally would do indoors. So it's definitely an adjustment trying to make it work with smaller numbers. We've been able to bring back probably 30% of our staff so far, but I mean, we have every week a big LA restaurant is closing. So there's a lot of change going on the LA side on the restaurant industry. There's a lot of new places coming in too, and a lot of established restaurants that have been closing pretty frequently. So it's definitely a very interesting time to try and figure out ways to make it work, and everyone's trying to get creative. I mean, everyone's doing takeout, and we're doing takeout too, but takeout's just not enough to sustain a business unless takeout was already your business model. It just isn't realistic if you're already running a 10% kind of margin.
Can you just tell? I don't know if everyone in the chat is familiar with the block on Highland and Melrose in LA, but can you just give us just a quick overview of all the many businesses that are kind of in Nancy's empire right on that block that you guys?
Oh yeah, so we call it the Mozzaplex. So we have a takeout spot that's already called Mozza to go, and then that's attached to Chi Spacco, which is sort of the speakeasy steakhouse, which got the brunt of the damage during the looting. So that one's still under construction and has been closed. But they're doing Tuesday nights out in our little piazza. And then we have the Osteria Mozza, which is the fine dining Michelin-starred restaurant right on the corner of Highland and Melrose. And then next to Osteria, we have the original, which is Pizzeria Mozza, which is more casual and sort of a more family dining establishment. And then Nancy also has a Pizzeria Mozza in Newport Beach, and she's opening 2 new restaurants in the Roosevelt Hotel in the coming months as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to try to hunt down a picture of that and do a screen share, but of what you guys actually really cool. Christelle, you have an interesting background. I want to get to like your civic perspective in a moment, but first I kind of curious, you're originally from the south of France. I'm curious the role of outdoor dining as you've seen in France and some of the, how it's worked historically there and what we could learn from it here.
Yeah, definitely. Outdoor dining is really deeply ingrained in, European culture. And the South is like extremely, loves it, like loves being outside. And so Italy, France, or Spain, they really kind of invading public spaces, which I think is great. It's a great tactic for placemaking and urban design. It's really the idea of like transforming our cities for our public spaces. And as Andrew said, restaurants are the backbone of our communities. And so turning an open space into a public living room has been developed, over the past decades and centuries in Europe. So the street becomes kind of a place you go to, not just go through. And so it creates a really vibrant and safe also public space because there's always something going on the street and people watching you at the same time. So it's also a safety practice in Europe.
And a lot more plazas and a lot more like kind of closed off stuff that doesn't involve cars, right? At least from my experience going in the south of France.
Yes, there's 2 models. There's the Parisian sidewalk cafe model, where outdoor dining is taking up the sidewalks and the public squares. And the second model is you just keep right past the sidewalks and you take over the streets or the parking spots. That's what we're seeing, I think, mostly in US right now. I live in San Francisco, so in San Francisco there's like the Shared Streets plan where they're closing a couple of streets. I know that New York closed a lot of streets as well, and in Europe, like the Paris have closed a lot of streets for biking, allowing restaurants to just invade that area now as well.
Awesome. Yeah, but I want to get into Sean, but before I do that, Andrew, can you talk about like how the city picked and chose in New York what streets were going to be open? Bond Street like is very Parisian, but other streets may not be so lucky, and some of those restaurants are going to suffer as a result of that. So, how do you create an equitable playing field for these restaurants to say, we'll close this street but not that street, or we'll alternate it this way?
Yeah, so we had two programs. So we have the open restaurants program, which is the restaurants can use the sidewalk and they can use the curb space, the parking spots. And then we have the open streets, open restaurant program. The open restaurants, open streets is part of the open streets program, which is found, I don't know how many miles they're up to, but I think initially it was something like 90 or 100 miles of New York City streets they wanted to shut down, not permanently, but they do it on weekends, certain days, certain times. And those restaurants that they chose to shut down could also have restaurants do basically similar to what Christelle said, basically going out into the street when it gets shut down. And it's tough. I mean, New York City, there's just so many different uses and there's so much different mixed use, there's so many different neighborhoods. Just there's a huge difference between, Midtown Manhattan to Lower Manhattan, like Bond Street, to Staten Island, that's much more residential, you can call kind of like suburban. So, the Department of Transportation, they've been looking at this for years, and they've actually had some pilot or some programs where they shut down streets. So they basically had to identify the neighborhoods that they think they could shut down the streets without causing too much, chaos, where it could be integrated into the neighborhood. So that's one way. And they had a list of a lot of these, and the city basically took a detailed look at all the streets where they think it made the most sense. But then also we have business improvement districts, community organizations could basically petition. We have a group of 8 restaurants on this block. We'd like to get together and close down this street. And then the city would work with that bid or that group of businesses or neighborhood organization and try to figure out the specifics. It didn't work everywhere, but it worked a lot in places. And I mean, we have some neighborhoods where, it's block after block after block on the weekends that are just shut down and restaurants are out there and other types of uses in that space. And then we have other areas where, it's simply one block that's shut down, maybe no restaurants, but it's like a good place where you could just bring your kid out to teach them how to ride a bicycle or something. So it's been nice. Or you see people get together, set up chairs, and they're just congregating, hanging out in the streets. So I think at a time when we were told to social distance and everyone missed that interaction with people, by closing down the streets, doing the open restaurant program, it's allowed us to be socially distant while we socialize. And it's so important, especially 7 months into this, being able to have that human element and that connection, which we've been missing, and which frankly is just an intricate part of what restaurants are. We're not just food, we're meeting places, we're social spaces. So it's been great. And now there's a move actually to make our outdoor dining program permanent in New York City. So maybe we'll look a little bit more like, south of France or Paris or throughout Europe, and I think people would like that.
Cool. I definitely want to get to that question about what the new normal looks like at some point in the discussion. Sean from Moza, I'm just curious about how you what were the biggest kind of challenges for you guys as a team to get up and running, and for your space in the back?
I mean, basically we have to translate everything from a set restaurant that we have our operating procedures, we have everything down, and then now the spacing is much harder, where the square footage, we're going around a full city block. Sometimes to run and grab something, you'll have to do 500 steps, walk a quarter of a mile just to go grab a bottle of something or whatever else you need. So there's a lot of running. And the staff, I mean, I track my Fitbit. I think we do 15 to 20,000 steps a night most days because it's so spread out where things that you need, you have to kind of run around the full block to get them. There's one fridge over here, that kind of deal. And there's tables just surrounding the whole city block. So it's definitely been a challenge with spacing, and also kind of training guests to do something different where they've been coming in, they've been doing the same thing. And now we kind of have to train them that, yes, you can drink an 06 Barolo 10 feet from a dumpster, but it's kind of a new standard where you have to kind of train people that this is kind of what it's going to be, and you can still have a good experience this way too.
Well, I'm gonna have to steal that Barolo line from you. And just the two of you, I just was curious, like in LA and New York, have there been any programs that are similar to what's going on with Chicago's design contest for the colder months? Have you seen anything innovative coming out with like what's going to happen in the winter?
On our end, I mean, luckily we're pretty blessed with the weather so far, but we're allowed to use heat lamps. So most places are renting heat lamps, and you can actually get them for a pretty decent price out here, and they're pretty readily available. So that's kind of been a saving grace out here in Los Angeles for the heat.
Yeah, it's been like 100 degrees, so I don't think we have to worry too much. Andrew, any design competitions that you've seen or innovation?
We haven't done something like Chicago has done. I mean, we just approved different types of heat lamps, but the propane, for various safety reasons, is not going to be used widely. Electric, but the thing with electric is, the pole, and a lot of the older buildings in particular, they may have to be retrofitted, which can cost, $10,000+ have an electrician come in. So, people have used these like bubbles. You may have seen these like clear igloos. I know they've actually got a bunch of like international press, which is interesting. And, it's going to work to something. But like I said, hopefully we have somewhat of a mild winter. I mean, last year we had one dusting of snow, but the year before, or maybe the year before that, I mean, we just got dumped on with snow. So hopefully it stays warmer. I mean, it's beautiful out today, but it's going to be a lot tougher than it's going to be, in LA. We've done a bunch of work with David Rockwell, the Rockwell Group architect, to build these socially distant, really nice outdoor dining installations. And, they block the wind and do different stuff, but, there's just no easy solution. I mean, the reality is it's the elements on the street, whether it's rain, snow, cold weather. Some people will tough it out, but the question is, how many people are going to be willing to sit in 25-degree weather a meal? Warm, is your food going to stay? So, I'll do it. I have no issue. But I think a lot of people may be tempted not want to eat inside outdoors. And that's why we really need to safely be able to increase occupancy. Because we said before, even with a 50% indoor occupancy, that's not going to save the industry. So we need the federal government to act. We need the Restaurants Act passed, which is a revitalization grant program. We need the Save Our Stages Act, which is another bill that passed through Congress. Senate's debating it. But there's no, unfortunately, brilliant idea that I've seen that's going to be like, all right, people can comfortably eat outside when it's, 20 degrees or 5 degrees.
Even from the Chicago contest?
No, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen everything that they've been doing. I mean, listen, there are some things, like one of the things we got passed is you can do a fully tented outdoor installation. So if you have the outdoor dining, you could basically make it indoor dining, so to speak, with a tent, and then you could get a forced air, heater, but then you're limited to the indoor occupancy requirements. So, if you're taking up, 2 parking spots, 25% occupancy of that, it's probably not even worth the cost of doing it. So.
Yeah, that's weird. All right. Well, I want to take a bigger picture lens and talk to Christelle for a second. So, Christelle's in an interesting spot. She's got a platform, Coady, that is, I guess you're a marketplace for helping people discover new types of non-traditional co-working. That's correct. And
yeah,
just curious, like to get your sense on like now that we have so many people working from home, and that's kind of the new, default mode of work now for many information workers. What do you see as the changing role of cities in America going forward?
I think a huge factor of change in US cities for the next decades will be remote work. As you said, like everyone, and I mean, more than half of Americans right now work from home. And recent studies shown that 60 to 80% of them want to stay remote. There's also another studies that found that 1 in 2 people won't return to jobs that don't offer remote work after COVID-19. So it's a huge, huge change. What does it mean for cities? I think the first thing it means is revitalization of neighborhoods, because now instead of going downtown every day, we're staying in our neighborhoods and work locally. So it's actually a huge boost for the local economy. Neighborhood local businesses get foot traffic during the day, which they had way less before because everyone was, downtown. And so it's reducing the financial drain of downtown commercial centers. And I think it's a great thing so that our residential neighborhoods have a chance to really thrive and be a, kind of a vibrant community during the day as well. Second is urban exodus. We've seen the rural exodus, but now there's actually a very real movement of people leaving, urban centers and going to the suburbia and rural areas. Early data is showing that 1 in 5 Americans have relocated due to COVID-19, and 1 in 2 people would move to a suburban or rural area if they were able to work from home. We're talking about millions of people, leaving downtown San Francisco and New York and Chicago and all the cities to go to smaller cities and towns or even more rural area. And so I think that's going to have a lot of impact on who is the population of our core urban centers. I think it's a good thing because instead of being in that city because of work, you're there because you love that city. And then it's going to redistribute wealth across the US in other spaces, little towns or cities.
Do you think it'll create a new kind of opportunity for people to open up new restaurants in those kind of cities that have been, or those urban centers where they've been vacated? Or do you think what ends up occupying those spaces?
In downtown, you mean?
Yeah, the places that are less desirable.
It's a great question. I think we'll always have offices, there will always be office workers. And so that will maintain a certain amount of activity during the day for local businesses. I think it was very imbalanced before, and now it's getting a bit more rebalanced towards residential neighborhoods as well. I'm thinking specifically about San Francisco, which is very, zoned. Like you have a commercial zone with downtown, and then the residential neighborhoods where there's no one there during the day because everyone goes in the office downtown. It's not mixed use. And so that was very hurtful for local businesses in the neighborhoods. There was a lot of bankruptcies happening. In my neighborhood, businesses would go bankrupt within a year because they didn't have enough foot traffic during the day. So even if, yes, downtown will suffer and they will lose some traffic, they will still have, because, hotels and offices are not going away. I think it's just a healthy rebalancing or redistribution of wealth and activity.
On that point of bankruptcy, Andrew, can we talk a little bit about how, we were saying earlier before everyone joined about how restaurants are getting artificially propped up right now. And, is outdoor dining and delivery enough? What is going to be enough? When will you be satisfied with some sort of solution here?
Yeah, both of them are not going to be enough. Pre-pandemic, when restaurants had 100% indoor occupancy and everything was, I hate the word normal, but pre-pandemic normal, so to speak, it was difficult enough to survive as a restaurant in New York City. So, a lot's going to have to be done. People always ask, well, how many of the 25,000 plus restaurants and bars in New York City have closed so far? we really have no idea due to the way the city tracks the permits and licenses. So we probably won't know for quite some time how many have actually closed. I suspect already the number is in the thousands. We do know that pre-pandemic, those establishments employed more than 300,000 people, and about 150,000 of them are still out of work. Out of those 25,000 plus places, about 10,500 are participating in outdoor dining. So we know they're still around. But I kind of reverse that question or make a statement on the closures. Really what's happening right now is all these restaurants are being kept open artificially. And the reason I say that is because New York State has a moratorium on evictions. It was just extended until the new year. The city council passed a law that suspends personal liability guarantees and leases. And some restaurants got money through the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program. So all these three policies, so to speak, have allowed restaurants to stay open that otherwise wouldn't have been able to stay open because they would have been going through eviction proceedings, or their landlord would have gone after their personal assets, and they wouldn't have any operating capital, maybe even to try to reopen because they didn't have paycheck protection money. So it's really the artificial nature of those businesses that are staying open. And that's why we're going to really need ongoing government support to let these places sustain themselves best as possible until we can get back to 100% occupancy. And also until the dining public is comfortable eating at pre-pandemic levels. And I'm not just talking about from a health perspective. I mean, in New York City, I forget, we have, 10 plus 16% or something like that unemployment. So people don't have the disposable income they used to. As Gustavo was saying, a lot of people have left urban centers. So a lot of people have moved outside of New York City or are working from New York are working remotely from outside New York City in the suburbs that aren't buying their coffee in the morning, aren't running out grabbing lunch, aren't going to happy hour with their colleagues after work that then turns into a dinner. You're not having the business meetings. In Midtown and Lower Manhattan, office occupancy is still at under 10%. Last year, we had almost 70 million tourists come to the city of New York. They eat and drink out basically all their meals. So it's going to be a long-term recovery. And what I keep saying to policymakers is, these restaurants haven't shut down or aren't potentially shutting down because they have a bad burger or customers don't like their service. They were mandated by government to shut down. So we need that same exact government to provide us the support so we can hopefully reopen and sustain that opening for the unforeseen future.
Yeah, wow. That's very powerful stuff. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know where. Let's see. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty shocking. So I want to just get in a time machine for a second. Go, let's say 18 months into the future. Did you feel it? We're there. Okay. Sean, are you there? You're still in the future now with us? We're in the future now. What is it? What is outdoor dining look like for Mozza, that whole block of Highland and Melrose? And what does outdoor dining look across the city?
I think now that people have kind of gotten used to eating outside or eating on a table on the sidewalk in LA, we've kind of gotten people trained to accept it. So I think we're definitely going to keep that for the foreseeable future. And then once we finally are allowed to go indoors, that'll just kind of help sustain us. Realistically, though, outdoor dining, though, on the streets, there are very busy streets around here, and we don't have the luxury of really closing down some streets like New York does, where if we couldn't close down Highland and Melrose, they're two of the most heavily traveled streets in Los Angeles, so that's just really not an option for us. But I think outdoor dining on the sidewalks will be here to stay in Los Angeles, especially now that there are a lot of people who are only feel comfortable eating outdoors and won't feel comfortable eating indoors for a long time. So I think it's definitely going to be an option for most restaurants where you'll have an option to go indoors or outdoors, and that should be here to stay.
Andrew, any predictions?
Yeah, well, I mean, first it's going to be, I mean, the problem with all of this is that there's so much uncertainty. You know, a lot's going to be just based on a vaccine, and when that happens, how it's, you know, rolled out. And then the other part's going to be whether or not the federal government can get their, you know what, together and actually pass some of these bills to help these restaurants, because something's got to give. If they haven't paid rent for the past 6, 7 months and they've accrued all this debt, at some point, you're going to have to deal with that reality. So I think if the federal government steps in before the election, or depending the outcome of the election, is really going to help influence what the industry looks like in 18 months. So listen, I've said a lot of doom and gloom. I think the positive and optimistic part of me knows that this is part of who we are. It's more than just like a business transaction. Nothing against like a shoe store, but like I can order my sneakers online. I can do this stuff online, but I can't get that human interaction. I can order food for delivery, but I don't get that interaction. And I think as social beings, we need that. So I think the industry will definitely come back. My hope, maybe there's some sort of reset in the price of commercial rents. There's going to be tons of vacant, fully built out restaurants. So my hope is there's access to capital for people that want to open new places. And maybe it's going to be similar to like what happened in the late 90s, early 2000s in New York City, where you got all these really creative chefs and restaurateurs to start opening up all these cool concepts that spurred the restaurant group concept. And it's another incredible time of indoor and outdoor dining and new restaurants, and provides more opportunity, because, you know, I speak with people in San Francisco and New York, and you hear from cities around the country, just it was becoming so difficult to operate an independently owned restaurant, and often you had to be part of a restaurant group. And even if you were part of the restaurant group, it was still tough. So hopefully there is some reset. There's the old Winston Churchill quote I always find myself saying, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And I think use this crisis and figure out how to build a kind of more fair and equitable and resilient and stronger industry coming out of this. The unfortunate part is we're going to lose a lot of beloved places on the road to recovery, and a lot of people won't be getting their jobs back. So, you know, there's pros and cons, but, you know, I guess such is life.
Okay, so I want to get into the Q&A because I know we got a couple of people asking some questions here. I'm curious if anyone has any data on cities that are already getting into colder weather. How are diners adjusting in those cities, and is revenue falling off as much as we feared? Does anyone know?
I can only talk about Europe, to be honest, about that. Like people, like the restaurants have heat lamps. That's like the basic to keep people, you know, dining outside, or coverage. And a good technique in Europe, like to just pass the best way, you know, just not take care too much about the weather and just enjoy being outside and eating outside, is having musical performances in front of the restaurants, so that it keeps people entertained.
That's a nice trick. It makes you feel warmer too. You get the warmth of the energy of the vibrations, you know.
Yeah. And in Germany, they would give you hot wine. That's a great technique too.
So we got to get the mulled wine program going, Andrew. We got to lobby for that.
Yeah, no, listen, I think that those are good points. I mean, the one concern that I have going to the cold weather is, at least in New York, there were a lot of concerns, at least from our governor, who put some executive orders in place where you can't just go out and drink per se. You have to order a food item, which is not just like chips, which is actually a meal. And the focus is really supposed to be on more of a structured dining experience versus just sitting and drinking in bar activities. So my concern is, yeah, if people could sit and hang out and just drink, and that was the main focus of it, I think as the weather gets colder, you know, it's a little easier with, you know, drinking and staying outside. But if you're really just going out for an actual meal, I think it's going to be tough, especially as it really gets cold, even if you have heat lamps. I mean, the few nights that it's gotten a little bit chillier in New York now, what I have heard is like people book, reservations 6 p.m., 6:30. But as it gets to 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. and starts dropping a little, that's when people who are comfortable eating inside will say, I'll go inside. So they've seen their outdoor seating in, the first seating be outdoors, and then the second, and if they have a third seating, people tend to go indoors a little bit more. But again, it's really all over the map.
Cool. Anybody can chime in on their favorite interesting, unique outdoor dining installation. No one's seen anything cool?
We have these globes, these like tents that are kind of cool. I actually haven't eaten in one yet, but there's someone who's basically taken up a whole block, a couple blocks from where I live. Also, some of the stuff we've done with the Rockwell Group has been really nice. Our president, Melba Wilson from Melba's Restaurant, we did a really nice one out there. We've also down in Chinatown, we did a whole block, communal outdoor dining. It wasn't, dedicated to one or two specific restaurants. You could order at any of the restaurants and go take your food and sit down. They're socially distant. We brought in like kids from the neighborhood that came in and actually painted them with some real professional artists. So it has a real kind of like local feel. And Chinatown, we have a couple Chinatowns, but the one in Lower Manhattan, it was just hit hard before everyone else was hit hard, even before the shutdown. So that one's really nice. And when the streets close down, it pulls in these planters with all beautiful plants that actually shut down the street. And then during the weeks when it opens up, the planters basically pull back into the installation. So it's very functional. It meets all the safety protocols. It has the local art flair, and it's kind of community oriented because anyone from any restaurant can go sit anywhere.
Cool. Next question we had was, do you see future chefs moving away from a restaurant entirely and continue with just pop-ups? Sean, do you have a thought on this as somebody who has hosted a lot of pop-ups? Can't hear you.
No. Yeah, I mean, from the chef perspective, it's much easier to do a pop-up. You don't have all the reliability. You don't have a lease that you're stuck into. You can kind of do something fun and do something new. It is harder logistically doing the pop-ups. However, it's much easier to get out of a pop-up, and a lot of these spaces that are empty, they give really good deals to chefs who are doing pop-ups, especially in closed spaces. Like I know Evan Funke is doing a pop-up called Fingers Crossed in an old nightclub space in Hollywood,
right.
A nightclub that couldn't be open right now. So he's doing a Italian pop-up in an old nightclub. So I'm sure they're giving him a pretty good deal along those lines as well. But yeah, the pop-ups are definitely here to stay too, and they'll continue to be a larger part of the dining experience, I think.
Yeah, it's a win-win. I'm also seeing a lot of pop-ups out of people's homes. Like Kate and I actually picked up food I picked up this pizza spot, the Detroit style pizza from some guy's house, and I Venmo'd him and I DM'd him on Instagram, and that was very cool. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. So I'm going to plug that on my newsletter this week. Is this platform called chef.com with an S. SHEF. It's actually in SF. You know about this, Christelle?
Yeah, I've met the founder once.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a cool concept. Yeah.
So question for you comes from Sandro. Deliveries are important to survival. However, daytime hours can be slow. Any insights into marketing to offices?
To who? To me?
Yeah. Like, how can restaurateurs market their deliveries to people in offices? Or is that even the right question to ask? Is like, what do you consider an office in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what I do is we do co-working in people's homes. So people can share their homes during the day and have some co-workers coming, or like a neighbor who's, can't focus at home. And so there's a new movement of remote work, and people take new places that we call like third spaces where they go work. So it's not necessarily an office. So I would say that the best advice I could give, I think, is to look for enterprise partners directly. or platforms where you have a good amount of remote workers in the neighborhood. Coty, our company, is trying to partner with local businesses, for instance, to nudge people to go eat outside in the local neighborhood.
Very cool. And is there like a menu integration, or is it just like, hey, go order, like here's a link to some websites?
For now, like each host is actually leaving a note with the recommendation for local coffee shops and restaurants.
Very smart. Question from George. I think Sean is best equipped to answer this, being on in the trenches here. So we've seen some obvious changes to how the front of house is working. What are some of the changes happening back of house now that we're all outdoors?
I mean, off the top of my head it's already so hot behind the line. Adding the mask is really, really tough. You're already sweating and it's hard to breathe back there already. So the mask definitely makes it a more of a challenge in the back of house. Secondly, if someone gets a steak and they want to raise the temperature, they get it medium rare, they end up wanting it medium. I can't throw that steak back on the grill. I have to make a whole new steak because if I take something from someone's table and put it onto a shared space like a grill, that's negligent and could risk spreading COVID or anything along those lines. So more precautious, and I have to say no a lot more than we used to because of the pressure that everything's being put on safety.
Anthony Fauci says, order your steak. I don't know, medium? Okay. And then last question from Phil goes to maybe Andrew. For cities with winter weather, are e-bikes and scooters viable and reliable delivery vehicles?
We have a whole long story with, delivery bike and e-bikes and what's permitted and not permitted in the city. But yeah, I mean, they're by for years and years. It doesn't matter what the weather is. You see delivery workers flying every which way down the street in all. It's tough. You know what I mean? It's not for the faint of heart, and it's a tough job in the tough weather. But I think it's just kind of quintessential New York City streets, seeing delivery bikes fly every which way, whether it's 100 degrees or -5 degrees. They're out there doing their job. And clearly the e-bikes and scooters help, because when you're out there all day doing these deliveries, if you don't need to pedal the whole time, gives you at least, you don't need to exercise and exert as much energy. Are
people actually using like real scooters to deliver food, or like it's just like the mopeds? Yeah, I mean, usually it's the moped. I mean, usually it's either a regular bike, an e-bike, pedal assist bike. I mean, there's a few people with kind of actual scooter, kind of e-scooters, but more like a moped type of thing. I've seen a guy on a one wheel. That was pretty cool. I actually got his number to talk to him because that's the kind of person I am. Anyway, I think we'll close on that note. Thank you all for coming to such a great discussion. I'm going to clap for myself. And thank you everyone for tuning in.